Second Breakfast with Cam and Maggie is brought to you by viewers like you. And by that I mean our Patreon supporters. For $2 a month, you can support the show and get a whole back catalog of bonus episodes across 2 years and a brand new episode every month. This year's month just dropped last week. We did a little preview for it on the channel. It was the fourth volume of our Breakfast Buffet series, which is us getting all excited about a bunch of movies all crammed into one big roundtable discussion. This one, I think, is a full hour of us talking about The Iron Claw, Godzilla -1, Poor Things, and Ferrari. It was a really fun chat. That is our sponsor this week. That is our plug. We're doing them up top now.
I don't know. I like that.
I didn't like tacking them on to the end. It
No,
deserves more.
I think
you gotta hit
nice.
the cross promo hard.
I think you do. And let's keep it going. If you're on YouTube, you can like this video, subscribe to our channel. That helps us a lot. Leave us a comment below. Speaking of comments, you can comment on YouTube or Patreon, or you can send us an email at secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com for any thoughts you have about our discussion, the chapter we're talking about, additional points you'd like to add, things you'd like to contest. We do actually have a bit of listener feedback that we'll read at the end of this episode. So just a little teaser for you there.
I'll do you one better, Maggie.
What?
I'll tell you that our episode next Tuesday, after this lovely weekend, is going to be the next installment of our ongoing Diablo 4 coverage. We're talking about Season 2, Season of Blood.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
We have a fun retrospective there, a bunch of our gameplay running in the background. Those are our plugs. That is our excitement. And now we are moving into the main meat of our discussion. We're back talking about A Game of Thrones. And we are meeting another new POV character this week. Who is that, Maggie?
That is Arya Stark. I'm very excited about this. This chapter was real short. I mean, they're all short, but this one was like, what, 6.5 pages? It was really little, just like Arya. I'm going to give... Baby Arya really... hurts my insides.
You identify with her, right?
I do.
An aggrieved middle daughter?
Yeah, it's like middle child who doesn't fit in, who's sad all the time. Although the one difference we have is that she hates needlework. I love needlework. I'm a textile arts queen, so.
You're both big into dogs.
Well, that's true. We both love dogs. All right, let me give you a recap of this chapter. We can get into a discussion. If you haven't been here before, we have read we've seen the entirety of the Game of Thrones show. Cam's read all the books that are out. I've read about half. So we're going to spoil things that happen beyond this chapter, just a heads up. Okay.
We also did chapter by chapter discussions of all the Lord of the Rings books and The Witcher. So
just keep that promo going.
Lots of fantasy stuff to talk about.
Love it. Okay. So in this chapter, Arya Stark is doing her needlework. She's doing it. She's like in this room with her sister Sansa, the Princess Marcella, and then a couple of Sansa's friends who are like the daughters of people who work for Ned. Their names are Beth Cassell and Jane Poole. I love that Jane's name is spelled Jeyne. George's ways of spelling names, it really kills me.
Rob with 2 B's.
Also, Catelyn spelled like Catelyn. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay. And also this woman named Septa Mordain is there. She, to me, reads as the girl Maester Luwin. That's kind of what she is. She's like a tutor for the girls. She keeps them,
teaches them how to be proper ladies.
Teaches them how to be ladies. Yeah.
Sure.
So she also like acts as a disciplinarian as well. So she's also there.
I was a big fan of Eloise when I was young.
What does that have to do with Septa
I
Mordain?
feel like if I had a Septa, I would be a proper young... What was the boy in Eloise?
Cam, I don't remember.
Was Eloise the one? No. Madeline is what I'm
You're thinking of Pepito.
Yes. I wanted to be Pepito when I was young.
Oh my God.
The girl with the yellow hat, right? That's Madeline?
Yeah, in the orphanage? You wanted to be an orphan?
I identified so hard with Pepito. I know he would be like the A24 grim live action reboot. It would be Timothée Chalamet, but I would like to throw my hat in the ring to play Pepito.
Okay. I'll let the movie studios know that you, nearly 30-year-old man, want to play Pepito.
Watching these ladies do their needlework, me watching from afar in the corner, reading these things, I felt very Pepito.
Okay, well, that's wonderful to hear. Anyway.
I was very good at sewing and home ec. I was the best in my class.
I know you were. I'm very proud of you. And now I'm better than you. So here we are. Okay,
Too old to be Pepito?
You probably are.
Old man Pepito?
Stop it. Please stop. I'm begging you. Okay, let's go back. So we're in this room stitching. Arya is concerned that her stitches are crooked. She just like feels like we get a lot of like understanding here. She feels like she doesn't belong with the other girls, and she's really jealous of Sansa in particular. Sansa, who's excellent at needlework, is really, really pretty, is really well spoken. Everyone likes her. She's so graceful. Like,
She's the eldest daughter.
Sansa is good at being a lady. Arya is not, and she just feels really like an outsider here. And the girls are all, except for Arya, are talking about how handsome Joffrey is. And they're like, oh, isn't he so handsome? He's so dashing. Oh, Sansa, you're going to marry Joffrey. And it's like, all blah, blah, blah. And Arya just goes, Jon says he looks like a girl. And they're like, who cares what Jon says? And Arya goes, he's our brother. And Sansa sort of like politely and gracefully corrects her and says, half brother. And it's like very mean, but that's like our first indicator that Arya sort of looks up to Jon and values and respects his opinion. But of course, in this argument, it sort of gets Septa Mordane's attention. So she comes over and looks at Arya's needlework and says, like, this is no good. Like, this is really bad, Arya. You got to fix this. And, like, Arya can tell that the other girls are quietly and, again, gracefully, but they're laughing at her and making fun of her. And Arya gets really upset and starts crying and runs out of the room, even though she knows she's going to get in trouble. And so she runs away. She just kind of wants to stay hidden for a while, doesn't want to be around people. And she finds her wolf pup, Nymeria, whom she has named for the warrior queen of the Rhoyne. I love Nymeria. She's so cool. But so she and Nymeria decide, or Arya decides that she Arya decides that she wants to go with Nymeria to go watch the boys who are practicing sword fighting down in the yard, meeting her brothers and then the two princes. She basically says like she wants to see Robb like kick Joffrey in his ass. Like she wants to see him fall down because she's upset. So she brings Nymeria with her. And there's like this window that she's going to go to watch all of this happening. And of course, who's there but Jon? Jon is already there watching. And so this is where we get a lot of information about how close these two are as siblings. Jon is not allowed down into the yard because he's a bastard, and bastards can't fight and potentially injure princes. And so and of course Arya can't go down there because she's a girl. So they're both sort of like these little outsiders watching things happen from down below.
Almost like gargoyles.
Yes, we're gonna get there. Don't you fret. And so when they get there, to Arya's disappointment, it's Bran and Tommen who are fighting, and Bran eventually wins. And so then Sir Roderick, who is their man of arms, says, "Okay, Joffrey, do you want to have another go with Robb?" And Joffrey is such a piece of shit. He goes, "This is a game for children." He's 12. He goes, "This is a game for children. I think we should fight with real swords." And Robb immediately was like, "Yeah, I'll do it. Let's go. Let's go." Rob's so funny. But then Roderick was like, "Guys, we can't fight with live steel. That's way too dangerous." And so he suggests they fight with like something in the middle, like dulled steel blades. But then Joffrey...
Tourney swords?
Yeah. The Joffrey's like, "No, I don't want to do that." And he sort of taunts Robb and walks away as the Lannisters laugh. That's the gist of what happens.
He's got a whole posse to laugh at everything he says.
Yeah, he's so mean. And so then like that spectacle is now over. And so Jon sort of turns back to Arya and he says, "You should probably go back to your needlework." And Arya says like she hates needlework and it's not fair, and she gets all upset. And Jon just kind of says, "Nothing is fair." And then Arya reluctantly decides to go back to her room. And when she gets there, Septa Mordaine and her mother are both waiting for her. And that's where the chapter ends.
Very nice.
Yes.
Yeah,
so fun.
It's a lot of fun here, and I'm excited to see what you pulled out of it, because I read this and really enjoyed it. It was, like you said, about 6.5 pages. And I enjoyed the whole ride, and then it ended, and I thought I had nothing to say. And I think I had to almost look back through the chapter and see the structure of it and try to look deeper at it, because on the surface I just enjoy the character introductions because we get to meet so many people here. We get Joffrey, we get the Hound, we get all these people we love, and it's hard to not just zoom ahead in your mind and see where all these storylines are going to go. But I think I found a couple structural things here too. And for the first time ever, I'm going to play into one of your theories that you've been talking about since the Tolkien days, and I've literally never contributed to.
I bet you are, because I bet we have the same ideas here. I'm very excited. Yeah, the structure is what stood out to me too. And I didn't have as much of a difficulty coming up with, like as I was reading it, I was having ideas and I was noticing the structure. And the structure that's really standing out to me here is the way that we are sort of watching the action as our POV characters also watching the action. Like we get some bookending at the beginning we get like actual Arya's plot and like her being around the girls and feeling left out, and then at the end her talking to Jon and then her going off to her room. But the main action of this chapter is the sword fighting, is the stuff that happens out in the courtyard. At least that's what I think. But of course our POV character is not actually a part of it, and so she feels very outside.
She's not really a part of the needlework either.
That's true. Yeah. So she's very much an outsider. I mean, that's what this chapter does, is it sets up a lot of things. It sets up Rob and Joffrey as characters. We learn a lot more about both of them. Both of them are sort of these overconfident boys, but Rob's overconfident in like a charming, boyish way, whereas Joffrey is overconfident in an incredibly nasty way. We also get a little bit of like, we learn that Bran's pretty good at sword fighting and Tommen maybe isn't. And, you know, we also get introduced to the Hound. And
Sansa.
Yeah, and Sansa. We learn that Sansa is like incredibly... She's actually pretty manipulative. She knows how to get what she wants. She knows how to play a room. She knows how to like get people to be on her side. We learned that she's not very good at riding a horse or math, but she doesn't need either of those things in this world.
There's a savviness in this conception of the character that I didn't feel in the first couple seasons of the show. So I'm interested to see how that develops.
I have always loved Sansa as a character, and I know you've always really disliked her, and I'm already like, yeah, I've always been right to like her.
That's
and I'm
good.
excited.
I mean, we all have our preferences, which is good because it means we bring more angles to the discussion.
Yeah. But of course, like what's happening here is this connection between Jon and Arya, which I think is what you're about to talk about. So I'll let you talk.
So the thing is, I have been into this series basically as long as I've known you.
You say over 10 years, yeah.
And Arya has always reminded me of you. And
Aww.
because Arya so resents Sansa, I think I have to do that because I'm on her side, which is your side.
I see.
So I think it's possibly your fault.
Is this where you're trying to tell me that you think my sisters are like Sansa?
No, I just think you're like Arya. Well, you don't have a horse face.
For the record, that's true. For the record, neither of my sisters are like Sansa. I don't want to make y'all think I don't love y'all, but okay.
Yeah, so at first blush, this chapter reminded me of Jon's chapter. And I don't just mean because Arya reminds you of Jon, but also that she reminds you of Jon and they both remind you of Ned, and you've kind of got like Russian nesting dolls there of stark similarities.
Sure.
But it's also because Arya and Jon are both very much outcasts, maybe more than anyone else we've seen so far in this book. Even people like Dany who are like in exile.
I mean Tyrion. But
we haven't met him as formally yet in his POV.
Sure, yeah.
But the other thing that connected Arya to Jon for me was the strength of their direwolf connection.
Yeah,
Because for the other kids, these dudes just seem like, oh, we have puppies.
Yeah.
But for these two, it's like, oh no, they got wolves.
Yeah, this is like my personality. This is like my like big, like it's a big point of connection. No, seriously, like it's an extension of them. Like I think that's, and maybe that's how the other wolves will start to play out as we continue on. I don't really remember from when I read these.
Yeah.
They don't do much in the show, honestly, except for Ghost. But I feel like the wolves are an extension, at least, of Rob and Arya, and I'm curious to see if Lady and what are their names, Shaggy Dog and whoever.
I'm just picturing Ned riding back into Winterfell and Arya looking down. New personality just dropped.
Sure, yeah.
But the structure here with all of those similarities between Jon and Arya, it felt like a series of nested echoes because you've got the outcast status and the direwolf connection. So it's not just echoes of Ned and Jon, but of almost the scene patterns we get in this chapter. Because, and this is where I want to talk about seen and unseen.
Awesome.
This is the first time I've ever done this.
Oh my gosh,
so
great.
Let me know if I do it wrong.
I'm so thrilled.
This chapter is basically 4 scenes. So it starts with Arya in the needlepoint.
Yeah.
And the point of that scene, to me at least, is the feeling of exclusion that Arya has. That is just ruinous to a young kid. And then we get introduced to her dog. And that makes her feel, different, somewhat better. It's a distraction at least.
Yeah.
It's very overt that these scenes are from Arya's POV. In the second one, she's the only human character in the scene. In the other one, it's very much her perspective on the other girls and her kind of shit-talking them in her head. And so I'm going to call this the scene couplet of these 4 scenes. We have 2 scenes. One of them, feeling of exclusion with the needlepoint. The second one is the dog intro. And those are very much seen because they are so biased to Arya's perspective.
Okay.
But then the cycle repeats itself more opaquely and at a further remove from Arya's POV.
Okay.
This is where she watches Rob and Joffrey, their whole violent exchange. She's watching from above, very much as an outsider to the scene. They don't even know she's there.
Yeah.
Of course, she's not talking in the scene, but to literally not be a participant and to just view things very much detaches us and her from the scene. She's an outsider, but she's also with Jon. And they're viewing this scene in such an explicit way that it reminded me of our old Tolkien conversations, where we used to talk about the narrative camera to try to see how impersonal he was being. Is the narrator a character, or is the narrator its own character? We used to talk like maybe Gandalf is the perspective that we're seeing a lot of this from, or whoever has a Palantir, maybe we're seeing it through their eyes. But this very much reminded me of those impersonal narrative camera discussions, because the themes throughout the second set of two scenes, there's exclusion of Arya. There's the exclusion of Jon. Neither of them can participate in this sport that they're eager to be a part of.
Yeah.
And even Jon is excluded because he wants to fight with the real sword. He'll fight with the tournament. He'll do anything to defend the honor of the family. So the exclusion theme gets so much brighter and more explicit in this second invocation of it. And then we complete the pattern and end this sequence of 4 scenes with a second dog introduction.
Oh, okay.
And that's the Hound.
Oh, okay,
but
cool.
Where the first time it's her literally talking to a big dog, this time I'm going to call it unseen.
Okay.
Because the Hound is never named that.
I was going to say, he's not called the Hound
He's called Clegane. He's called the Burned Man or the Knight. So we have this full cycle of starting with exclusion and then ending with a dog. The first time it's completely seen. The second cycle, it's completely unseen.
Oh, okay, interesting. Oh, I like that.
And if you take this as part of a character introduction, because this is the first time we're really getting any sort of time or attention to Arya's character.
Yeah.
Seeing inside her mind, really hearing her speak at all. I think it sets an important cadence for the character, because we're introducing a major theme here of exclusion, and we're getting this pattern repeating twice. We haven't gotten such a rigid pattern like that in anyone else's character introduction.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I think structurally, it sort of returns us to that distillation echo conversation.
Right.
Because going from seen, exclusion dog, to unseen, exclusion dog, I think it heightens those similarities. It makes us think of Clegane in the way we think of a direwolf, possibly, as a companion, a defender, maybe a wild thing that could turn on you.
Right. Well, and we know from future things that happen that the Hound sort of, in a sense, replaces Nymeria for Arya and becomes this extension of her, this protection of her.
A violent companion.
Yeah. Nice.
Yes.
Nice.
And of course, the exclusion theme. We know, I mean, we're sort of 2020 vision here. We know that will continue because she's an outcast through the entirety of this story. She's always the fish out of water.
Yeah.
But the last little thing, just to kind of sprinkle on top of this idea, is that this chapter also pays off the idea that I picked up on in the last Catelyn chapter, where we started with her praying for a son and ended the chapter with her rejecting one.
Yeah.
Here, we introduce Arya very much coded in the masculine way, as sort of, she wants to be with the sons.
Yeah.
She wants to do all the activities they get to do.
She's better at the male activities. That's where she thrives. Yeah.
And we end this chapter with Catelyn's disapproval when she's there waiting when Arya goes back to her room. So it's another echo, it's another angle, and another distillation.
Interesting. So yes, she and Jon are both sort of rejected by Catelyn, not in the same way, but even at the very beginning, we hear in Arya's thoughts that Catelyn has before said that Arya has the hands of a blacksmith, which is not a thing that a 9-year-old girl wants to hear, right? Yeah, I mean, I like your parallel thing with the exclusion dog thing, and then it's seen and then unseen. That's really interesting. I really like that interpretation of it. The seen and unseen thing that I was focusing more on was really in the power of observation with both Jon and Arya. So I think we can just extend this discussion further. Because when we first met Jon, and even before then, we talked a lot about how, Jon's wolf's eyes are open before all the other ones so he can see. And then when we meet Jon, we learn that he is a really good observer. He pays attention. He has to learn how to be a good observer because of his status as a bastard. He has to pay attention to what's going on around him. And then, of course, when we come upon Jon in this chapter, he's already sitting and observing a scene, from afar, from a hidden distance. But then we connect this with Arya, because Arya, when she leaves the needlepoint room, the narration says she wants to stay hidden. But then once she and Jon sort of come together on the page, that's where we get this sort of, I think they're both equally good at observation. 'Cause we see there's a balance here, because when Arya comes upon Jon, she's actually able to sneak up on him. The narration says that Jon was so absorbed that he seemed unaware of her approach until his white wolf moved to meet them. So he's so focused on observing something else that he himself is able to be snuck up upon by Arya. But then it sort of balances by Jon helps Arya to see, because they're looking around, and Jon says, "Do you see Prince Joffrey?" And says she hadn't, not at the first glance. And he says, "Look at the arms on his surcoat," Jon suggested. So he's helping Arya to look at Joffrey, but Arya is able to sneak up on Jon, so it's balanced in that way. Because before we've been talking about how, well, Ned's totally blind. He doesn't see shit, right? Catelyn can see more than him. Maester Luwin can see more than Ned, but we've sort of like are building this hierarchy, and ultimately Jon is the one who can see the most. And here I think it's meant to be equal. And I think what's really cool, if we want to like extend it to, you know, outside of just like their own personality traits, but like extend it to the main plot here, is that in looking at Joffrey's surcoat, they're both noticing the Lannister and Baratheon divide. On Joffrey's surcoat, instead of like the Baratheon coat of arms, it's split down the middle. It's half Baratheon and half Lannister, which is unusual. And they both point that out. And that's sort of reflecting upon what we noticed in Jon's chapter when they're at the welcoming feast, and the Stark banners are hung, obviously. The Baratheon banners are hung, obviously, but also the Lannisters are, and we thought that was fucking weird for this patriarchal society. Right. Why would Cersei's house be, front and center? Oh, because all of her children are actually Lannisters.
And we'll find out later they're bankrolling the crown.
Right, yeah. And so Jon and Arya are both able to observe that here. Neither of them fully understand what it means, obviously, especially because Arya just kind of says, well, the woman's stuff should also be on there. Like, why should Cersei's, house not be on his arms? And Jon's like, yeah, that's a good point. But Jon's just like, oh, that's interesting. They don't make 12 leaps ahead and figure out.
They're flagging it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In a way that nobody else has flagged anything so far. And even like when I feel like the hair color of the Baratheon quote unquote children has been noted by Arya and Jon only. Like when we first meet all of the Lannister Baratheon children, when they come in, that's through Jon's POV. All of them, he notes they have like this golden hair.
That's a great catch.
And even now in Arya's POV, they notice that, Joffrey's hair is shining in the sunlight and it's golden. And I think she even points out Marcella's golden hair when they're in the needlework stuff. So this like observation and curiosity about the Lannister children and their true parentage is already being observed by these two.
And George obscures that a little bit by also having Arya talk about the reddish hair that the rest of the Stark kids have, and that she and Ned and Jon are the only ones with kind of the dull brown hair.
Yeah, that like Stark hair. The other kids have like the Tully red hair. So
it's not. It's sort of a way to hide what's happening, because you're not just noticing the thing that's going to pay off later. You obscure it a little by noticing something else.
He's being incredibly subtle in all these little hints that he's dropping. So much so that maybe they're not even hints. Maybe we're reading too much into it. But I think it's meant to be there, and I find it really fascinating. I also just liked at the end of the chapter, we've talked a lot about, I don't have much to say about prophecy here, but we've talked about prophecy. Oh, great. Well,
just a little.
I'll start it, because we talked about prophecy and foreshadowing, right? And near the end of the chapter, when like after they've watched the sword fight, Arya doesn't want to, go back to her room. But Jon's like, yeah, you should probably go back to your room. And it says that reluctantly she turned in the other direction. And it's just kind of in its own paragraph, and it just felt like it was carrying a lot of meaning. And that's, of course, what ends up happening with these two, is they both end up going in complete opposite directions, which Arya does not want to do. She doesn't want to go down to King's Landing, but she has to. And then, of course, they're not going to be reunited for years and years and years. So I just thought that was interesting.
Even though they have a similar temperament. They end up on very different paths.
Right.
Yeah.
Also interesting to note that in both Jon's and Arya's intro chapters, they both leave a scene crying. They both run out of a room crying. I thought that was really interesting.
Prophecy has really come down to earth in these last two chapters. The way we talked about it with Jon, the limitations of being a bastard, and of course the way we talked about prophecy last time with Catelyn as adopting a more cultural and sociological significance, it being less of a spiritual thing and about fate and destiny and all those fun Sapkowski things, but that it's more meat and potatoes. It's about possible futures and limitations. I talked about Jon being sad that he wasn't going to inherit the family business. It wasn't about I want to be the king of Winter. It was just, I kind of want to make my family proud and be like my dad is.
Yeah, he just wants to do a good thing. Yeah.
There's a lot of that here where we continue that kind of on the ground way of looking at prophecy in terms of futures and limitations. And if you're born into a certain track, then you're sort of prophesied to become that thing, right? Joffrey he doesn't have a divine warrant to become king. He was just born on the right track. And we're taking that look at prophecy and limitation, not through, oh, Jon's a bastard, not through, oh, Catelyn is just kind of the wife who can be dismissed if her opinion isn't wanted, but through Arya, we get a different discussion of gender roles, of monarchy and hierarchy. The theme I talked about earlier with exclusion, I think, is explored more deeply here than we have anywhere so far. The economics. She talks about how Sansa's bad at numbers, so if she marries Joffrey, someone else is going to have to look after, like, their bookkeeping.
Yeah,
There's a discussion of privilege here and class, but it's all done at that ground level because of the Stark children, Arya kind of has it the worst. Like, if things go to plan, and we know they won't, Bran and Rickon will end up being some sort of bannermen to Robb.
Right.
Robb's going to be fine. Theon's going to be kind of fine. Sansa's going to do great.
Yeah, she's going to marry somebody. She's going to marry Joffrey, probably become the queen. She'll be fine. Yeah.
And Arya and Jon are not.
Yeah.
And I think it's beautiful and telling that it's through those characters that George has done a lot of this on-the-ground exploration. And I think whether you want to call them gargoyles or outcasts or however we frame them, it's with these characters that George is doing some of that Sapkowski work. Because in these chapters, he feels more like Sapkowski did. His type of fantasy was that of the embedded reporter. We talked about him as an investigative journalist. And I would say this chapter, more than any other that we've gotten in this setting, is more of a look at Winterfell and the world of Winterfell than any of the previous Stark chapters we've had so far. I guess the question to you and to the audience down in the comments is, do you think this more cultural, sociological lens will continue through the rest of Arya's story? Is it unique to her? Will it extend out into characters like Jon? Where do you see this work continuing through the rest of the story?
I don't think it's necessarily specific to Arya. I mean, I think she's a great character to read all of that stuff through because of her strange position, but I think we've already started to get a little bit of it with Jon, and I think it's going to continue with all of these, these gargoyle characters that you identified a few chapters ago, people like Tyrion. I mean, Tyrion's incredibly observant of how the world works and where people stand and like social standings and rules and that kind of thing. So I think that kind of thing is going to continue with Arya for sure, but I see it extending to other characters too, especially those outcasts.
There's an interesting kind of relay race idea here, because Tyrion is the ultimate gargoyle. Yes, we can say Ned Stark is perceptive, but he's not a survivor. He doesn't weaponize and use that information and stow it all away in the tactical way that Tyrion does. So if Tyrion is the gargoyle, him meeting Jon and giving him some advice sets Jon on the track to be more of a gargoyle. And we see him in this chapter literally perched at the top of a building watching things.
Right.
And then he gives that advice and teaches Arya
right,
how
I was
to
gonna
be
say,
perceptive.
Arya doesn't get that kind of thing from Tyrion. She gets a little bit from Jon, but we know they're about to be separated soon. So who's she going to get advice from?
Well, I think that's what I'm saying. You start with Tyrion. He gives the bug to Jon, and now he gives it to Arya. So we're seeing this relay race of this gargoyle ability moving through the cast.
And I think she, from what I can remember, I think she's going to start to get some of that from... what's his name? Her sword dancing instructor at King's Landing.
Yes.
I think he's going to sort of fill in that gap a little bit because he's a little bit strange and on the outside as well. Or at least knows how to blend in even if he himself is different.
And people like Jack and Hagar.
Yeah.
Or the Hound. I mean, a lot of her companions are...
Oh, the Hound, who's a major outcast. And he's, but major also, gargoyle character.
I feel like everyone she ends up with is incredibly savvy and resourceful. In a way that is more of an applied gargoyle thing, because Tyrion is a gargoyle in that he is present at all of these council meetings, but he doesn't really have to survive out on the road too much.
Yeah, no, not till much later. So
yeah.
I also, I'm just thinking about her being able to sneak around and that sort of thing is hinting towards her dance instructions that she's going to get from that sword master later, but also much later in her story when she has to become this assassin character who has to sneak around and remain unseen and all of that. So all of that is there. And I think what she learns is not really how to blend in so much as how to be hidden in plain sight. That's what I mean, right? She's not hiding in the shadows, but she's hiding in plain sight. I think that's what really she's learning how to do here. She's not learning how to fit in, but she's not necessarily learning how to completely hide either. She kind of does this in between thing.
As we build out this tapestry of characters, and particularly POV characters, I'm really interested in the cross-pollination we're getting. And the echoes between Arya and Jon I thought were incredibly telling here. We have a piece of feedback from our listeners and viewers. We're calling this our little leftovers segment, keeping with the breakfast theme. And Maggie's going to read out that piece about Jon.
Yes.
You have that ready?
Yes, I do.
Cool.
So this was an email we got, which you can always email us, secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
This email comes from Ona. Ona said a lot of wonderful things. I'm going to focus more on what they've talked about with Jon. So Ona says, hi, Maggie and Kim. I absolutely love the podcast. In the last episode, while you were talking about Jon being an outcast, I couldn't help but think about something you guys said in the Bran chapter. While talking about Bran, you mentioned how he fit into sort of the young male main character archetype. While I agree with this, especially later when magic becomes a big thing for him, I think Jon is more fitting in this role. He's an outcast even more so than Bran, and he also has major prophecy surrounding him, which I feel puts him higher than Bran in the main character stereotype. I totally agree with that.
Interesting.
And I think, honestly, that's what happens, right? Jon becomes our main character, especially after Ned has died, especially after Bran is just, fucking around in the woods for books and books, right? I think Jon really becomes our hero, our sort of underdog, chosen one hero that we sort of rally around.
Spoiler alert, I suppose, but I would argue that Jon particularly becomes the main character after Jon dies.
Well,
and he becomes the one guy to come back from that.
Yes, exactly. So I think that's totally there, and it's cool to see that is present from the beginning.
He becomes there's a narrative privilege for him coming back that I think you can draw a parallel to Gandalf. He is so important in the story that he has to be brought back.
Yeah.
And then occupy this unique central role.
Well, and what I think is so special about this story in particular is the way that George sets us up with so many fantasy main characters. At the very start, it's going to be about Bran, this young boy who's going to become this thing. Then, oh no, it's clearly about Jon. Jon's intro chapter feels so beginning of your fantasy story, chosen one outsider, right? But then even doing it with Arya and somebody like Dany, and of course Ned, right? And even Catelyn to a degree. So
Rob as the avenging son.
He's setting all this up everybody here is a main character. And I think that's why there's so much conflict here, is because everyone sees themselves as the main character, and that causes all kinds of problems. That's really oversimplifying it, but I think that's a really interesting way to think about it.
And sometimes the best characters are not the main characters. If we can come back full circle, I'll bring our attention back to Pepito. Because if I am Pepito,
right,
Maggie, you are the human man from Curious George.
What? Okay, in the big yellow hat. Sorry, I was thinking George of the Jungle for a second. I was like,
what's his name? The guy from Curious George.
If you hadn't said that, I could have told you. I think he's just the man with the yellow hat. I don't think he has a name.
I think there's a lot of you in the yellow hat man.
I thought I was more the monkey. But sure.
And that's, as Pepito, that's what would make me feel comfortable, because I'm used to all my friends wearing yellow hats.
But why aren't you thinking of me as Madeline? The love interest of Pepito, the main character. Madeline.
No, you're the guy in New York with a weird circus monkey in his apartment.
Just carrying him around, be like, yeah, this is my monkey. What of it?
But me, your very proper son, Pepito, you've sent me off to a boarding school.
Oh.
I don't even know you have a monkey.
France.
Another son. A replacement son.
Pepito's from Spain,
Is he?
Yeah.
What am I? I'm thinking of Eloise again. They're right there on the shelf. On my brain shelf, they're right next to each other.
I think this is a good spot to wrap it up.
As Pepito, I wanted to live in the plaza as a child.
I bet you did.
But you wanted to live in the zoo.
I did. That's true. That's very true. Wow. But which of us wanted to live in an orphanage in Paris? That's what I want to know. With a nun.
Little Gavroche.
In an old house in Paris. Okay.
Get the little Gavroche hat.
If you have a favorite classic children's story, send us an email at secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com. You know, like and subscribe, Patreon, all that. Thank you, patrons, for supporting us. We love you so much. All right. Well, if you subscribe to our Patreon, maybe we'll take a picture of Cam dressed as Pepito. I'm just going to hold that.
Sure. If we get enough new patrons, we'll buy a full little outfit. I'll do a cosplay of Pepito.
There you go. Little bullfighting outfit.
And we'll see you back here on Tuesday for the Diablo 4 Season 2 episode. And then on Friday with the next Game of Thrones chapter, which I believe is
I'm pulling it up right now. Yeah, is this the one?
I think so.
One? All right.
Have a good weekend. This is Pepito signing off. Bye.
Bye.